Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the Crowbar, a podcast about gaming and other things. Today, in our Other Things special podcast, we're going to be talking about a game, which has kind of become uncommon for our special podcast. Anyway, we're going to be talking about the Castlevania series. And by we, I mean me, Alex Wiltshire, and you, Jamie.
Hello. How you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I'm glad you could. We've been talking about doing this for quite a long time now, which is just as well because it's given me enough time to actually play what's actually turned out to be a far bigger back catalogue than I actually. Well, I mean, I kind of knew it intellectually, but to actually play the games, yeah, there are a lot of Castlevanias. There's a lot of hours in those castles.
Yes, and a lot of backtracking to be done through the same spaces over and over again, swatting at lanterns as you do so. I mean, I think luckily one thing about them is there's a pretty well agreed upon canon to the games, even though there are billions of them spun off in various different directions and remakes and stuff like that. But luckily, yeah, I think generally the mainline games are all pretty set in stone as to the ones that you should and you shouldn't play. So at least there's that.
And I think it's going to be all quality all the way down for this evening. We're going just to warn anyone who knows more about Castlevania than us. You'll be disappointed because we are not going to be completists about this. What we want to do is quite a sort of personal, or our personal histories of the series. We're not going to do it chronologically. We're not even going to talk about it in the order of how good they are. We're just going to talk about them in the sort of the headspace, I suppose, that they exist in, and partly in the order in which we encountered them in our lives. Because it turns out that Jamie and I kind of played them in a very similar, similar order. Maybe because we are British, and that puts us in a sort of slightly strange international position with the series.
Yeah, it's very weird to play Castlevania games whilst being British because, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I was a kid growing up in the 90s, no one had Nintendos, really. Everyone had a kind of grab-bab collection of weirdo computers from the 80s, you know, Amstrads and Amigas and stuff like that. And if you did have a proper console, it was a Sega one. And so Nintendo stuff didn't really come into play in my life at all, was when, you know, people got N64s and started playing GoldenEye and stuff like that.
Exactly.
Castlevania, if I ever played it, was like a game that you would play on someone's Game Boy and it would be too hard immediately and then you'd stop playing. That was like the whole of my experience with Castlevania throughout the 90s, pretty much. So yeah, it's amazing to kind of, I think, if you're American, you probably have much more of a grounding in quite how, incredible the games were, even in that era. And you kind of had a sort of sense to build on as the games sort of entered their sort of second iteration when they became the Metroidvanias that they are today. But if you don't have that, it's just very weird to start in on like we did with something like Symphony of the Night, which is a whole different thing, and kind of realize that there is this whole other thing before that as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think having played Symphony of the Night over the past week or so, I realized that I never really understood that game, or at least I understood one kind of layer of it until now. I only used to understand the kind of the fun, just itselfness. It's roving. You've got a castle, you can rush around it, in this open way, and you duff up a load of monsters, kind of without really being particularly challenged at most points. And but now, yeah, I'm realizing that there's a shitload of another layer to it, which we'll talk about in a minute. But so presumably, Jamie, you played it on PlayStation more or less when it came out, or did you come into it even after then?
Symphony of the Night. No, Symphony of the Night. I played on, relatively recently. I'd say in the last 6 or 7 years for the first time, and I played it on emulator.
Okay.
I mean, I'm going to fess up here and admit to stealing almost all of these games at some point or another. Just downloading the ROMs and playing them on an emulator. And my defense is, I mean, I guess, they could come and arrest me. My defense is, as soon as it was possible for me to actually buy any of these in any real sense, I did. So I had now purchased copies of Symphony of the Night and all the Nintendo games on the advanced collections that have come out, recently. But no, I played this for the first time on a PlayStation emulator. I mean, it didn't come out in apart from anything else, it didn't come out in the UK.
It came out on the 360. It was a 360 version.
Oh, on the 360 eventually,
maybe,
but
I don't know, 2009 or something like that. Yeah, that was when I played it. That's when I played it. And I was aware of its. Obviously, I was very aware of its like prestige at that point, and I remember just playing it extensively. But of course, the big secret had been kind of revealed. Like I knew about what happens when you finish the game, which we'll talk about because it's not exactly. We don't have to worry about spoilers now, probably. But the inverted castle. So that wasn't a big shock, and but up until that point, I remember because I was really into the Metroid games, and I just loved the chance to just play another Metroid. Because at the time there weren't many Metroidvania games around, sort of late noughties, and playing on 360, that was good. Horrible pad.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, that like it's because particularly with indie games recently, like a Metroidvania has become one of the sort of primary forms if you're a sort of up and coming indie company and you want to sort of particularly if you want to sort of show off your pixel art or something like that. That's kind of a way that you might go, but there was a huge gulf of time there where there was kind of nothing at all really, and Symphony of the Night, it's a timeless game, so it kind of fits into that space pretty completely. So do you want to sort of define what Castlevania Symphony of the Night is, Alex? Because I'm sure there are people listening who haven't played it.
So it very much follows the Metroid template, which is you start the game super powerful. You are Alucard, who I had no idea about when I started playing the game, but you are Dracula's half vampire son, and you've come to Dracula's castle, having heard that dude is going to be resurrected. Oh shit! Though, you know what I'm doing though? I've forgotten to talk about the very start of the game, because the very start of the game is actually okay. And I'll come back to that bit. There's so much to talk about with this game. It's going to take ages, this podcast. Anyway.
It's a ludicrously maximalist game. It's kind of insane, really.
Let's just do this Alucard thing first. So you're Alucard, super powerful. You rush in. At the start of the game, the first you see, you're in the forest. The camera is panning along. It's obviously a 2D game, and through a forest. And there's Alucard moonwalking forwards. I'd say that's his animation. It's definitely a moonwalk, but he does it facing forwards rather than backwards. It's an amazing animation. It's so. It doesn't match the floor at all. Like there's no attempt to make his foot movements match the speed at which he's kind of moving across the flagstones. But boy, God, it's got style. Anyway, he's rushing through, and he rushes through the forest, crosses a drawbridge into a castle, and bam, the game starts. You then just walk through a corridor, down a hallway. There are massive wolves. They die in a single hit. The music is guitars and synths, and you just feel great. And you're just going through, zombies appear, bam, bam, bam. There's stuff to smash up. You just run through, one hit kills all the way through. you step through a few different rooms after that point, and then you meet Death, and Death takes away all of your weapons. Death knows you because you're Dracula's son, and he's upset that you've come to kill Dracula. And then he's off, and that's the start. And that mirrors the Metroid template, which generally has Samus powerful at the start of the game, loses all her weapons and suit upgrades, and gives you a reason to reclaim them again. It gives you a taste of the power that you'll have towards the end of the game. And Symphony of the Night knows the effectiveness of that template and sets you on it here. Is that about right?
I would say so. I mean, and it's I think you conjure very well the amount of style and joy that the game kind of pumps straight into you right from the off. I mean, I'll add a +1 to the music of the game, which is just extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's this kind of mad mixture of like guitars and organs and a kind of weird, crazy symphonic heavy metal kind of vibe, which just never gets old, really. It's a timeless soundtrack for a sort of timeless game.
It's huge as well. I mean, I didn't really appreciate just how huge that soundtrack is until I've been playing it over the past week.
Yeah, it's colossal. It's so much work that's gone into it, and it's like it's such a monumental soundtrack that there's like that band Dragon Force basically lifted their sound wholesale from that game's soundtrack. It's like kind of ridiculously over the top vibe, and just the style with which you move, the pixel art on your character is fantastic. You leave kind of shadow trails behind you as you jump, and like all Castlevania games, really, it is ultimately a game about jumping and attacking while you're jumping. Often, that's kind of the main thematic basis of every Castlevania game, and it's the main thread that kind of flows through them is the joy in jumping and attacking at the same time, which is, it's something that game just really like fetishizes to such a degree, through how the enemies are designed, how the weapons are designed, the way the Morning Star has an animation where it kind of swings forward in just this kind of ludicrously like pendulum motion and to sort of knock down whatever's in your path, and everything is just kind of the feeling of it, is just glorious.
Yeah, it really is super special. And but what I forgot, like, and I'm really glad that you brought up the whole thing about the jumping and hitting, because that is a real fundamental of the whole series. And I was thinking, we're gonna have. I think we'd better wait to talk about that until the end of the podcast, when we go back to the very earliest days of this series. But actually, I'd forgotten the fact that at the very, very, very start of the game, which absolutely confused me when I played it the first time. I had no idea what was going on. I just didn't know anything about what that section is referencing, and that is the fact that you start the game at the end of the game that this is meant to be the story sequel to, and that game is Rondo of Blood, and it has you as Simon Belmont. Yeah, Simon Belmont, isn't it? Is Simon a Belmont?
I think it's Simon, yeah.
Yeah, one of the Belmonts.
They're all the same. They're all the same character.
Exactly, yeah. And you're not playing, this isn't Symphony of the Night. You're playing this kind of pixel perfect rendition of an older game, a game that came out on PC Engine originally, and we'll talk about it in more depth later on. But
it's also doubly confusing because it puts up a title that says Bloodlines.
That's
which
right.
Is the name of the last level. It's the name of the last level of Rondo of Blood, but also the name of another Castlevania game. So it's so deeply confusing.
Apparently, it is called Rondo of Blood in Japan. That's the subtitle in Japan, which does make a lot more sense and kind of at least directs your attention a little bit better.
Right, yeah.
But because it's pixel perfect, like you're controlling like the old style controls, and it's all very stiff. And we'll talk about all this later on properly. But the jump and attack is fundamental. And you fight the final boss of the game, who is Dracula. So it's a flashback at the very start of the game, which shows what happened to Dracula at the end of the game before Symphony of the Night, which is audacious. It really is. I mean, maybe it's not so audacious for an audience that actually knows the series. For a poor British boy, I wasn't a boy, but for poor British people, it was very confusing.
Well, the fact that they start having this conversation, which is instantly nonsense, like talking absolute bollocks straight from the start, to an iconic degree, you know, Bag of Secrets and all that sort of stuff. Which, if you end up playing Rondo of Blood, you realise is a holdover from that game where Dracula and Belmont talk in like mad philosophical, like kind of arguments to each other. But out of context, I find like positively deranged the way they're talking to each other at the start of the game. It just seems so weird. You know, and the fact that he sort of smashes a wine glass like this kind of big flouncy movement as well. It's
beautiful.
It's great. It's so camp and ridiculous.
Exactly. And it really and camp. This is a camp game. It's definitely a camp game. So that it just fits this sort of like. I watched. Oh no, Jamie. Thank goodness you're here, because I've forgotten the film name and you'll know it. The vampire film with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt.
Interview with the Vampire.
Interview with the Vampire. I watched that a couple of weeks ago, and I was fascinated by its. I was kind of half aware of it, but it was fascinating to be reminded of the style of vampires at the time. I think that came out maybe just around the time of Symphony of the Night, and it was very much the gothic high romance as vampires of sad posh people with long hair being sad.
Yeah, long hair, and they have plunging necklines with ruffled collars. That's kind of
exactly, and that is Symphony of the Night's take on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's fabulous, really. You say it's a camp game. It might be the campest game, actually. It's also kind of, it's so overstuffed with things to do and see, and like random monsters that only show up in one area, which are, is like a naked lady with a big like monster growing out the front of her, that spits like, petrifying blood or whatever. It's just kind of, there's so much excess in there. And the game kind of really kind of wallows in it.
There's an extraordinary amount of pixel art, like just the sheer weight of the number of creatures. Most of them are animated sort of fairly fully as well. They're not just sort of static images or anything. There's a lot going on. And a lot of them are confined to one particular hallway or one room. There are lots of rooms where there's just nothing else but a kind of, you might not. There's a tower section where there are these side passages which are often quite hard to see, and one of them which doesn't even go in the direction that is important to you, because you want to go right, and this one goes off to the left, I think. And inside there is a kind of a confession box, and if you go in there and you press up, you'll sit down in it, and then a ghostly priest comes out, sits down, and either gives you an item or more frequently causes loads of spikes to come out. And if you sit down in his seat instead, a ghostly woman comes in and gives you a confession. You don't hear anything, but it's just this animated sequence that would so easily missed, and it's just full of that stuff.
I love the sequence late on where you have the flashback to Alucard's mother, the kind of the mad dream section, which is kind of like horny and demented is the words I would use.
It's horny and demented.
It's so crazy. And
your mum is a succubus. Oh my God. She's not a succubus, but it's a succubus that's taken.
It's a succubus that's doing it. That's right. Yeah. You can look through a telescope at a bit and see a man floating along on a boat,
or a fish might plop.
A fish plop. And just there's tons and tons of stuff in there. There's also kind of crazy weapon builds you can do, which make you essentially invulnerable.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of mad builds you can go for, and it has a kind of, I think, really before its time RPG kind of, it really wants to push you to have fun and to try stupid things out and kind of, be silly.
It really doesn't give a shit, does it? You pick up so many weapons over the course of the game. They're just, it's just another sword, and you kind of look at it and the stats aren't particularly better, or maybe they're far worse, and you never use it. The game doesn't care. It's just there. It's something for you to pick up and something for you to experiment with. And there's usually some bizarrely secret ability to it. Oh, it's holy, which means, it does incredible damage against stuff. There's all this sort of incredible, attention to systems, which it never really surfaces to you at all. Like, for example, when I first played it on 360 all that time ago, I didn't know about any of the magic.
Yeah,
I didn't.
You can completely miss the magic in the game.
Yeah, it doesn't care. There is a way that it surfaces to you, but only if you buy scrolls, which are quite expensive, from the man in the library who sells stuff. But
the man who, if you turn into a bat, you can fly up his japsy from the floor below. and it gives you sort of an amazingly. I mean, I love the thematic attention given to the fact that, hey, you're a vampire, so of course your specialist powers are the ability to turn into a wolf, just like Drac does in Dracula, some mist, just like Dracula does in Dracula, and a bat, which they all do, all the vampires. And if you turn into mist, and they all have all these special abilities that you'll upgrade over time. If you turn into mist, you just walk through you just float through every attack in the game. Nothing can touch you. There's a room full of exquisitely drawn pixel creatures, each with their own attack animations and abilities, and they're all consummately produced, designed for you to maul your way through or attempt to. And also, fuck it. Turn to mist, go straight past them. I mean, you can't not love the game like that. No, I think you're right. And the other way, it has this glorious map, which is this kind of complete steal from Metroid, but is just just fantastic, and is still the kind of if you play a Metroidvania now, they're always going to use a variation on that map, which sort of will hint at where the exits are in a certain area or what you haven't explored. The introduction of sort of warp rooms to kind of help you, move around quite, quickly from place to place, and the kind of mixture of the sort of, enjambment of them and save rooms as well, kind of push you to, both grind, but also, take pleasure in, not having to backtrack too much. It all just seems so well, laid out for you, basically. Yeah,
the save rooms are the exact right spots. And the way that you discover your way through as well. Go on, sorry.
It anticipates so many of the kind of main features of what people love in games, even today. Yeah. Like the secrets that you would find in a Dark Souls game are there in Castlevania behind, illusory walls, basically. The Easter eggs of a Hideo Kojima game are all there in kind of various forms. And the kind of a sense of discovery as well that you would also find in a kind of Dark Souls-y type form, that kind of sense of an area being a reward in and of itself because you're seeing something new and you're meeting new monsters. And it might not even be an area that you actually need in order to finish the game. It might be optional,
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff is really apparent in that game long before I think it becomes, sort of as common features as it is today.
And celebrated today as well. I don't think anyone really understood at the time. You understand it on a kind of a gut level, but I don't think that anyone would have voiced or actually pointed out all of those things. It's the unlocking shortcuts as well. That happens all the time in Symphony of the Night. Let's just grasp the low-hanging flute. But Dark Souls owes all that whole series. I mean, I think it owes everything to Symphony of the Night, even more so than Metroid, because Metroid, I think, is a bit more rigorous. It doesn't have the sort of loosey goosey sense of place that Symphony of the Night has. The way that it wants you to just go to the same places over and over and experience them at different states of power, which Dark Souls does, and you get very used to in Symphony of the Night. You know, that feeling of an area being really hard the first time you go through, or it's, you know, quite a challenge, and then, you know, towards the end of the game, you're just sort of just single hit killing or just bouncing over everyone. It's extraordinary. Really,
I always think about the two series, Metroid and Castlevania. I always think about Metroid being like techno. You know, it's like it's serious and it's complex and it's you know, almost austere and rigorous in its beats. And then you know, Castlevania is much more like house music. You know, it's kind of exuberant and over the top and sort of fun. You know. And I've always sort of thought that they're the kind of two poles. The two poles of Metroidvania are the, you know, the techno kids versus the house massive. You know,
that's very good. I think they knew it as well. I just read a note that I gave for myself. When you die, the death card, whatever you call it, the death screen says, just has for no reason at all. Just let us go out this evening to pleasure. The night is still young. So good. They knew about house thing. The inverted castle. I on the first playthrough, I didn't play much of the inverted castle. I felt that I'd had enough by that point. And the inverted castle initially feels very awkward indeed, and it's kind of meant to disorient you, I think. You know, just to explain, at the end of you go through the steps of the original castle. You go off to defeat Dracula, only to find that Belmont, the very guy that you were playing at the start of the game in the kind of the fake start, is there, and he's been possessed by a naughty demon or a naughty guy called Shaft in order to enact the resurrection of Dracula. And you have to go through some steps. You can do some alternative endings if you decide just to kill Trevor Belmont. But the proper way to do it is to defeat the thing that Shaft that has possessed him, and then you go through a portal and you are in the inverted castle. Dracula has, unfortunately, you were too late. Dracula has been resurrected, and the game basically, or well, not even basically, explicitly has reversed the whole castle, and now every ceiling is now the floor, and all the floors are now the ceilings. The color palette has changed in most places. In some places, what were bosses are now just normal grunts. The whole new set of soundtracks, whole new set of monsters that you haven't seen yet. A whole new set of items, all sorts, is lying there for you to get to do. But I kind of did you play this when you
yes,
got to it?
So I did, yes, I did. I knew about it because I, you know, reading through walkthroughs, it kind of you know, clued me in. I can't imagine what it must have been like for the first people playing this game who got to that moment and thought they were at the end of the game.
Because it feels like a meaty game. You feel you've got your money's worth by that point, I feel.
Yeah, especially because it gives you so much, you know, leeway to piss about and just muck around, like not completing it. And then to get to the last boss battle and realize, oh, there's like still basically a third of the game left to play. Yeah. You know, a third extra. It's just wonderful. It's marvelous stuff.
Yeah, it's weird because it is a third, but it is the entire castle. But actually, there's and it is filled with monsters. But yeah, there's less to collect, isn't there? You don't have to do quite as much.
And you've got all your abilities and your powers, so you can kind of blast through it a little bit more.
Yeah.
But no, what a superb swivel. And again, like, you know, the fact in, you know, Dark Souls, there was, you know, areas like Ash Lake or the Great Hollow where, you know, they're hidden. You don't know they're there, and they're there to be discovered, and they're there to give players that moment of feeling like they're seeing something that most people won't see. And it's just, you know, that's such a glorious feeling when that happens.
Yeah. So it's only been playing it after having gone back to experience, a lot of the other Castlevania games, that I realized what the Inverted Castle is, this incredible monument, a love letter to the whole series that had been, that had come to pass so far. The bosses in that section, a lot of them reference things like the bosses in the very first Castlevania, which I think is just fascinating. Like, there's a Frankenstein boss that does that, a bat, which is actually a recurring boss across the series. There's this, there are a lot of the monsters and things, throughout the game, there are lots of monsters which are archetypes from previous games as well, like the floating eye, the zombies and all that sort of thing. The skeletons that kind of throw a bone in a loop, kind of...
The flea men.
The fucking flea men. Yeah.
The worst.
Yeah. But I think that the final, there's a boss in there, which are three fake characters of sort of... It says, if you look at the bestiary kind of thing, when you go to the guy in the library, there's a bestiary of every monster you've encountered. And when you go to the entry for this boss that I'm going to talk about, they are zombies dressed up or trying to pay themselves off as characters from the third game in the series. There's fake Trevor. There's fake Grant and fake the wizard woman, but I can't remember her name. But
Cypher.
Cypher, thank you. None of these things I would ever have realized until I'd played all the other ones. But like, after all that this game did to completely transform the series, it then just spends a third of the game just gushing about it. It's fascinating.
I love the bosses in the game generally. The one boss, which is the big mass of people.
Oh yeah,
that you kind of. I mean, that remains a kind of really like technical marvel even now. It just kind of, it's so spectacular and mad. It's a big. I mean, it's a big mass of bodies in a big circle, and as you kill it, bodies fall off and they get up and they start attacking you from the ground, and it's just. Completely insane, and like nothing I've ever seen before really in a game. It's just like it feels so unfiltered in a marvelously over the top way. Yeah, it's just great.
Yeah, I was quite shocked about that because it's oh my god, because there's like a real thump as the bodies hit the ground and then they get up and come towards you.
It's really gross and unnerving. It's fantastic.
And then just to. I mean, there's so much more others to talk about, but we really should move on to other games. But I just want to call out the title, the end music, the credits music. There's just sort of Kenny G sax sort of fucking ballad going on.
Yeah,
which is just so welcome as well, so good.
It's funny at the time that it was just they didn't release it in the UK because they were kind of like. Well, I guess they thought, well, no one has a Nintendo, no one's played any of the original games. I can just imagine someone in the room thinking this. And also, it's a 2D platformer, and it's 1997, baby. We don't do that anymore,
The
and the fact that
of the 3D game,
and the fact that it's the game that probably holds up best of all the games on the PlayStation 1. It still looks fantastic, which I can't think of many other games that you could say that for.
Absolutely agree.
And I remember that time, I was 12 in 1997. I remember that feeling of like 2D's over, man. It's, no one cares about that anymore. We're going to, launch into the rich and textured cyberspaces of the first Tomb Raider game or whatever. It's like, and so it's weird. It's weird how brainwashed we were at the time to think that everything had to be, 3D.
Yeah, it was no slouch because it uses 3D in the best ways. Putting a clock tower like in the distance and changing the angle you're looking at it as you move around. Like there's a beautiful cathedral room with these shafts of stained glass light playing out, and changing the sort of angle as you pan across the room. It really, it's such a good looking game today.
The big sword boss, which is a kind of 3D. It might not be a boss; it might just be an enemy, but it's kind of a 3D Disembodied Sword, which is another sort of series staple.
Yeah,
but fantastic game. I super recommend anyone to play it legally if you can. And it's just guaranteed fun. I think to move on to some of the other games, I think it is slightly a problem for the series because, like, you know how in the Marvel Comics universe, Captain America, like in universe, is this kind of amazing thing that they created that they can never quite get back to. Like they're always trying to recreate Captain America and they end up with like Deadpool or Wolverine, and they try and recreate the metal that they made his shield out of, and they end up with adamantium instead of the thing that his shield's made out of. And I do feel like they've kind of had that with the Castlevania series, the official mainline Castlevania series since then, in that there's a bunch of interesting stuff that they've made in the pursuit of capturing what made Symphony of the Night so great. And I'm really glad that they've done it because we've got some great games out of it. There isn't anything that captures, they've never quite managed to get back to it. And I think they're all worth playing, even the bad ones. But they've never quite recreated Captain America with those games. They always
they never get the excess, do they?
No, they just sort of almost do. And even Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, which we'll come to, that's a game that I think really, really tries to deliver on that promise, and even that doesn't quite manage it.
Yeah. So, and I think partly the problem is, I was really kind of surprised, rather shocked about how little time there was between the games. So after Castlevania Symphony of the Night, it was a series of games on GBA, on Game Boy Advance. So it's in 2001, Circle of the Moon, 2002, Harmony of Dissonance, 2003, Area of Sorrow. 3 games, 3 years. It's difficult to they did get better. Like the Circle of the Moon was a little crusty. Harmony of Dissonance, I don't think I actually played it. This Harmony of Dissonance, I think I played, but I've forgotten. Area of Sorrow is a good game. Hands down is a good game. And I really enjoyed replaying it over the past, recently. But before Symphony of the Night, and Symphony of the Night really does stand proud of it, and that surprised me.
Yeah, it's funny because I think, as you're saying, like these were the ones that a lot of people came to first on there because they were kind of I did have a GBA briefly. It was stolen from me on the banks of Lago Atitlan in Guatemala after I stupidly my dad got it for me as a sort of here you go. I know everything's gone to shit at home, but have a GBA when you go back in. And yeah, that was stolen from me. Although I didn't have any of the. I think I only had the Metroid game on it. But sorry, I digress. I think, as I understand it, that these games were among the best looking games on the GBA. So if you had a GBA, it was often what you sort of wanted was one of these because they were. Up there with kind of as close to kind of graphical showcases as there were on the system. Yeah,
they were great. Like all these sort of scaling sprites and sort of great big sort of screen-filling monsters, skeletons and whatnot. Great big, crawling skeletons filling the screen.
I mean, I played through the first 2 quite recently because there's this great collection that's come out for Switch and for other consoles as well. The GBA Advanced Collection. Castlevania Advanced Collection. Circle of the Moon is fine. It was made without the involvement of Koji Igarashi, who is the kind of mastermind of these games. It kind of feels a little bit, different because of that. It's got a different move set. It doesn't feel quite right. It's kind of, it takes place in a slightly different feeling world. And it's slightly maligned these days. People tend to tell you to skip it. I think it's fine. I think it's quite a fun game, really. It's got good music. It's got good jumping. The jumping's still pretty good, if not the very, very best. And you can spin your whip round. It's kind of and the graphics look nice. The graphics. It's quite stormy here. I hope that's not picking up on this microphone. The graphics are kind of appropriate Castlevania weather, but the graphics look nice scaled up. I mean, they still look impressive to my eyes, even though I think at the time they were far too dark, apart from everything else, for the GBA
that was
screen.
Genuinely true. Yeah, that was very much the case.
And then Harmony of Dissonance, which is the one where Igarashi came back to kind of set them on the right track, I think is a great game. It's got horrible music because they sacrificed that to have more space for kind of more castle, which I think people were bothered by in Circle of the Moon. So the music is this awful tinny chiptune madness, which will just drive you insane if you play it. Much better if you just put the Symphony of the Night soundtrack on. But generally, it's the thing that's really good about it is it's a really big, rangy castle, which has kind of alternate versions that you unlock early on. That's that kind of version of the inverted castle in Harmony of Dissonance. And I can understand people being bored by it and feeling like there was too much backtracking and too much busy work in it. For me, playing through it recently, with a small baby on my lap, who will wake up if I make too much movement. It's just been perfect to kind of, and it's a really massive castle in that game. It just goes on and on and on and on. It's too big. And that game is too big and too long and too boring. However, if you like the jumping and the using the whip while you jump, there's not, there's kind of, it's kind of great. And also, along with Circle of the Moon, it has both of those games have really interesting system stuff to kind of delve into as well. I won't go into them in too much depth, but Igarashi is always experimenting with different kind of RPG formats, and he often has very interesting and unusual ways in doing that. Card combinations you can build towards to kind of spec in all sorts of different builds that you can make. One thing that kind of becomes part of the firmament of these games is the idea of sort of absorbing abilities from bad guys. And that can kind of be a frustration because often there's an incredibly low chance that things are going to drop. So vital items that you need become quite scarce. But generally, I think, those two games particularly, even though they're not as good as Aria of Sorrow and not as complete, there's a lot of fun to be had in them, and that collection on that you can get is a good investment if you do like the jumping and the fiddling and the Dracula-ing.
And who doesn't?
Who doesn't like a bit of Dracula-ing?
I played Aria of Sorrow on my GBA. I used to work in Epping. I used to live in central London, and I used to work in Epping in Essex. And the journey was long on the tube, right out to the very end of the Central Line. And I just played Aria of Sorrow, just mopping up all the souls. So in that game, the kind of the IGA thing to sort of pull out the gameplay time and a slot machine style was these souls. Every monster in the game had a soul that would give you some sort of ability, and you'd slot them into your character. And I 100%ed it on these tube journeys. Loved it, absolutely loved it. But I knew no better at the time. But it is still a good game. I do enjoy the sheer audacity of a lot of the swords being a very, very large blade that appears when you press the attack button, appears above your head, pointing to kind of 12 o'clock, and then rotates. Usually, kind of. From if you're facing to the right, it would sort of go, spin from 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock, and that's your attack. And anything within its arc would get hit. It's really fun to use. It's really fun to kind of to jump into and time the jump in such a way that the arc hits exactly what you want to. But it's so goofy, so good.
It does feel like a martial art developed by Hitler based on the Sikh Isle, doesn't it? That's kind of what you're doing there. It's very, very, very weird movement to see. But yeah, it is clearly worked out so that you can be doing, as I have said, the jumping and the swinging.
Jump and hit.
I mean, the games, since the earliest games, they put things just above your reach Every single game has that as standard, doesn't it? That you're collecting your hearts, which in Castlevania are your magic points instead of your health. It's so stupid.
Yeah, like to everyone, like, thank goodness, I was nearly dead. It's like, no, you're still nearly dead after picking up all of those hearts.
There's some. I mean, as I say, they're not quite the magic of Symphony of the Night. There's wonderful stuff in them. I think it's one of these ones where, like, it has you're sort of walking through the castle, and it has the baddies who appear in the mirror as you walk past them, and it's like it's you, monster dude, you, and then you go back to the mirror that was the monster dude, and he pops out and attacks you and stuff like that, which is such a brilliant gag. Basically, it's a joke,
and it feels like you discovered it. Like it does capture that feeling that you identified in Symphony, where you feel you noticed it. And you feel like you discovered it, and you feel that, if I do something special with this, maybe something will happen. I don't believe it does, but the fact that there's this sort of potential is really special.
Yeah, it's really good fun, and they always. I think that's always at the kind of forefront of what they're doing is fun, which is, I guess, is a weird thing to sort of draw attention to. But I guess it's almost like fun at any cost. It's this kind of real kind of grab bag approach to fun, which is, the original Castlevania games are all about precision and are all about, a kind of almost like Stalinist attitude to fun, whereas these games are much more, a kind of exuberant Mr. Tumble attitude to fun. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about the DS games? Because I'm pretty sure I'm sure I played them. I know I played Dawn of Sorrow, although at least I've got the cartridge and I've got a save on it, and it says quite a high percentage level. So but I don't remember anything about it. Portrait of Ruin, I watched a video of it, and it looked vaguely familiar. I have no idea whether I played it. I think this is the problem with this era, of the games. Like, this was for many series it should have been the halcyon days, the fact that Konami was pumping out all these Metroidvania, Castlevanias, and yet they became a bit of a mush.
Yeah, not least because of the naming convention that I really wish they hadn't bothered with, because it makes them impossible to. The fact that there's a game called Aria of Sorrow followed by a game called Dawn of Sorrow.
Yeah, I think it was at least a sequel, but yes, it is a sequel. Great naming.
Yeah, I'm with you. These are the ones I've played the least of, apart from Order of Ecclesia, which is a stone cold masterpiece of a game. It doesn't quite have the all-time classic of Symphony of the Night, but it is brilliant. It's kind of a different kind of game, really. It's hard in a way that Castlevania games never are.
Or at least the Rovey Castle ones.
Yes, since Symphony of the Night, they've all been pretty easy, although not always, quite as easy as that one. But no, Order of Ecclesia. Which does feel like a kind of bold new direction for the games, which mixes the kind of, it's kind of Twitch platforming and, Twitch combat mixed with the kind of dense RPG systems that we've already had. And I think it's a pretty gloriously beautiful and well-conceived game. The other two DS games, like you say, they slightly just blend into the background. I'm sure they're great. I'm sure they're really, fun. But for me, if I'm firing up a DS emulator, that's always going to be the one I go for.
Yeah. So I've got a hole in my my experience with Ecclesia. Its thing is a greater reliance on precision play and RPG stuff. What's the thing that makes it great?
I would say it is the difficulty level of it is moment to moment is just more intense. You can't heal through the bosses like you can in most other games. The healing items aren't strong enough. In Symphony of the Night and its antecedents, you can just pause and eat like biscuits and stuff to bring your health back up halfway through a boss battle, and that's fine. In Order of Ecclesia, that's more or less impossible because they're not powerful enough. and the levels themselves are just more dense and difficult. The save areas less common. The system for abilities is you absorb abilities from enemies just as in other games, but it's much more focused on your sort of moment to moment play as well. You can't rely on anything. Basically, you have to get good at the game. Essentially, at least in the sort of first part of it, I think sort of halfway through you get a bit more powered. But it has a second level that you can die on, which isn't true of any of the if I play through any of the previous Castlevanias, from Symphony of the Night onwards, I tend not to die very much at all, really. I'm using save states as well, but Order of Ecclesia, even with save states, you die constantly because it's hard. But what it also is, it's got quite a good story, which is saying something for these games. It's very beautiful. The pixel art is as good as they ever did. There's an animation. The character you play, when she's absorbing an ability, she turns her back to the player, lifts up her hair to expose a big tattoo that she's got on her back. Which then sucks in the sort of ability from the recently departed enemy, which is just a wonderful animation, just kind of absolutely beautiful, and never gets old when you see it. It's kind of this weird kind of alluring, I've just put my hair up for a second, sort of pose, which is just great. So that one is a real stunner, that game.
Yeah, I can see if I can try and resurrect my old DS and see what we can do.
Yeah, I feel like they're going to put out a collection of the DS games. I mean, they've done the original series and the GBA one, so hopefully the Castlevania collection will extend to the DS games, because I'd like a chance to play.
How are you going to write the runes? I do remember one of the things from, I guess it was Dorm's Shire, having to use the pen, because DS games insisted on this kind of thing, to use the pen to write runes, and you'd kind of screw it up every time. I think a lot of the magic was based on that.
Yeah, and that's also, I think, one of the reasons why I haven't played them so much, because on emulator that's a little bit tricky to pull off. So it's, my law breaking has been, but I feel like they could emulate that pretty well on a Switch or a touchscreen or something like that.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. Hey,
and apparently they're making games again. Apparently they're making games again, Konami, and are going to commit to doing more stuff. So that's what they say anyway. So
let's see.
I'm sure I'll just mean NFTs. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Let's zoom forward. You mentioned Bloodstained as Ritual of the Night, which came out 2 years ago, 3 years ago, something like that. Made by Igarashi himself and a new team and his new studio, kickstarted. What do you think?
I remember, I think it was you at the time on the Crate and Crow pod proper, said that the lead character managed to be both underdressed and overdressed at the same time, which stuck with me. It's very funny. She is. Yeah, I mean, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, it's great. It's a really great game. It is kind of all the excess of Symphony of the Night, kind of without any of the cohesion. I think it's an extraordinary mess of a game, Yeah. It's all over the place in terms of its design. I think it's kind of ugly in the way it looks.
Yeah, it's 3D. It's all 3D, but it doesn't have the no elegance. Yeah,
yeah, and kind of mad in terms of. Well, I guess I say it's mad. It's mad in a good way. I mean, it's actually a game I really, really like. The movement feels great. It lets you get really, really powerful. You can kind of, one of the first spells you get is a basic kind of knife throw of the old Castlevania style. And I leveled that up all through the game, and it was really good fun. By the end of it, I was sort of machine gunning people with but no, I think it is a game that is an attempt to recapture the kind of fun of Symphony of the Night, and it is a lot of fun. There's it's an enormous castle. There's so many different builds you can do, so much stupid stuff you can do. You can get an ability that turns you into a chair, That's one of the spells you can absorb. The chair doesn't do anything. You're just a chair. There's a battle along a train. You get a train halfway through this game in this big castle. The abilities are really good fun, and you get really powerful really quickly, and the game allows for that. It doesn't the game's enemies kind of scale up in such a way that you kind of it's an enjoyable ride, rather than like a slog or just a blitz where you're killing everything in sight. It's got a bunch of cosmetic stuff with you can get haircuts and you can change your outfits. It's got cooking, it's got crafting, it's got different characters you can play as by basically morphing into them, including like bunny girls. You can be like a bunny girl ninja woman, and you can just play through the game as that. It's got one of the spells you get just inverts the level, so you get your inverted castle from Symphony of the Night, but this time she just jumps in the air and goes, invert! And the room turns around. And that kind of obviates a lot of the bosses if you can remember to do it, because it just makes them so easy. It's got a great boner ending if you go and kill the first boss, really early on, and don't do any of the optional stuff that kind of unlocks the rest of the game, where you're kind of standing outside the castle at the end of the game, like, all right, well, guess we'll go home then. And then the game ends, it's good, which is quite fun, which is the game's way of telling you to, play it, go back to your save and play a bit more and uncover more of the castle. And it just kind of a real diversity of areas of things to discover and stuff to do. And I really enjoyed it. It isn't a masterpiece in the same way that Symphony of the Night is, but it is, the closest anyone's come to kind of capturing the madcap camp ridiculousness of that game. I don't know how you felt about it after banging through it.
Yeah, I know. I feel very much the same. Yeah, I mean, I was uncomfortable with the sort of the modern kind of fan kind of fanish stuff in it, but yeah, I really did enjoy the power curve and the sort of the sense of kinetic sort of rushing through rooms. That's the feel that I wanted to capture, and it totally did. I didn't really, but then I finished it and didn't really go back. It was never. I'd kind of forgotten. It's quite popcorny in a way that it didn't have a sort of it wasn't that memorable. I was kind of struggling to remember it as you were talking, sort of thinking, the chair. I forgot about the chair. But you'd think that a game in which you turn to a chair, you should remember it. But no, it's I think looking back on it, actually, I was weirdly more. I'm find more memorable, and I'm more interested in the fact that they also made that Curse of the Moon game, which is a sort of a pixel action, which is styled on the early Castlevania games, and how fully drawn that was, and how imaginative and playful it is with the legacy of the whole series. And in a way, despite it being clearly the slighter game, but clearly the game that isn't of as much broad interest to people, it's probably the one I find, weirdly more interesting.
Yes, I've got those games wish listed, because I think there's actually a sequel to that one as well.
That's right.
I'd love to have a go at those, because I think, you can tell just by looking at some footage that they're made with a lot of love and care and precision that is probably somewhat lacking from their mother game.
Yeah.
I will say that after Bloodstained's release, in that kind of Kickstarter-y way, they had a bunch of post-launch content, which apart from anything else made it playable on the Switch. People will tell you not to play it on the Switch. If it's your place, you want to play it there, it's fine. That's how I played it, and it was fine. A little bit janky, but what you're expecting. But actually, their post-release content has been pretty good. There was a randomizer mode that they made, which is basically based on some of the sort of stuff that fans have been doing for years, and is really good fun if you ever want to mess around with a randomizer of any of the Castlevania games, because they can do some extraordinary stuff where you upload your ROM to a mad website, and it will give you a bunch of options of how you want to randomize your game. You can set it so it completely randomizes all the items, and or all the bosses and things like that. And so in Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, they were going to do a roguelike mod, but then they decided not to do that, and instead they did a randomizer, which is just immense fun because you can give yourself all sorts of mutators and difficult kind of things that make the game harder or easier, or potentially harder or potentially easier, changing where items are, changing where the enemy placement is fixed. I think that's the thing that they couldn't get round. But it can completely turn the game into this kind of bonkers exercise in speed running. Like I played a run of it which lasted 15 minutes because I got an item that just meant I could, I got an item early that meant I could just jump up to the main boss straight away from the very start of the game and end the game immediately. And the game, again, they've allowed for that. They've made it as silly as you like, and you can also share your seeds online and play other people's, roles of the world. And I think that's really nice. I think it's nice to kind of, look at the ways that the communities around these games have kind of engaged with them, in the kind of interim, and actually just sort of wholesale importing that into their game is great. And there's been a bunch of other stuff that they've, thrown in as well, like different characters. And there's like a kind of, I can't remember what it's called, but it's called it's like an old school kind of NES version of the game where you sort of play through in a particular. They basically rebuilt a kind of old school Castlevania sequence of levels, and you can play through that in a kind of Twitch way as well. And so there's all sorts of cool stuff in there that is a real bounty of stuff that you can get into, if you want to.
Yeah, I probably should go back to it. I think we stand at a bit of a crossroads. Like I think that it's pretty clear we're not going to be talking about the 3D Castlevanias because there were at least 2 games on PS2. I think there was one on the N64. I didn't play any of them. Did you play any of them?
Nope. No,
it was kind of outside of them. Yeah. And you would have had to have gone back to play them anyway because we're kind of latecomers to the whole series. But yeah, so we're going to stay 2D. I think we're standing at a bit of a crossroads. So I was saying we've got we can go all the way back to the start of the series, or do we go to Rondo of Blood now and then go back to the start?
Yeah, well, just to keep things freaky and to keep, if you want the step-by-step Castlevania survey, you can listen to the very good Retronauts episode that was out earlier this year.
Yeah, that was good, actually. Yeah, I enjoyed that. Yeah.
So we keep it freaky with us.
I think that we should do fill in the bit before Symphony of the Night. If we move up, go from the start because, and then go to Realm of Blood, and that will take us to loop us back to the start of the podcast. I think that there's a neatness to that. I think.
Yeah, totally.
I hadn't played. I mean, it's clear we've already talked about this, but just to reiterate, I hadn't played any of the earliest Castlevanias up until about probably 6 months ago, a year ago. And I think I mentioned on the pod actually a long time ago, but back then, I was just stunned by those games. I probably blew it a little bit. I didn't play the first Castlevania first. I played Castlevania 3 first, and I found it a really surprising game. I'd kind of it was initially it was stiff and awkward. The jump in the game is one you have to commit to. There's no air control, so once you jump, you've started a little arc that only the game is going to finish for you. When you use your whip, your character stops in place if you're on the floor, so you feel vulnerable in the very moment that you're making a strike. There's a movement to it which is you feel slow. Things are coming to you, all these patterns. You've got these Medusa heads that are sort of swimming through the air on this kind of sine wave towards you. Everything's quite readable. Like roughly where enemies are going to be coming to you, But I often, I was surprised by just how impotent I felt to be able to cope, to be able to face them and beat them. Initially, I found that very off-putting, but very quickly, actually, I realized I started to really enjoy it. There's a real incredible rigor to it. Like every element of its action design is so beautifully considered, and every enemy's attack and movement fits with that impotence that you feel, or at least that stiffness in a beautiful way, really interesting way. And then you realize that there are little things you can do. Now we've talked about the jump and attack, and the jump and attack is like the Castlevania thing, and it's so important to the early games because the jump and attack, as Jamie knows, allows you to strike your weapon while still being able to move. You know, you're still sailing through the air, you're on the arc, but you're not going to stop moving in the way that you would if you were on the ground. And it is the way to keep moving, to be able to avoid stuff while also dealing damage. And it's a real skill. And it's like, yeah, that was kind of my experience of kind of coming to these early games and realizing that they are fucking treasures. They really are.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I think they are the most, I mean, again, it's such a tired comparison, but I'm going to use it. But like Dark Souls owes so much to those games because they are about obtaining mastery over a space which is incredibly hostile to you, but incredibly consistent in that hostility. Once you've learnt the systems of it, it's an incredibly fair experience. You know, once you've learnt how to not like fall off the stairs past the like kill box of the screen, which is just the most irritating thing when it happens to the 50th time. It's just like, oh no, I jumped up the stairs and fell. You know, I was just there. I just climbed up that bit there, and now the screen has scrolled upwards, and now that is certain death. It's funny because, you know, Spelunky is obviously you know, a game close to likely close to anyone who's listening to this is heart, and it's funny how well Spelunky captures the kind of joys of Castlevania. I think, you know, there's a reason why the weapon in Spelunky is a whip, and it's similarly, you know, when you first play Spelunky, you're like, oh, this whip's crap, and then, you know, eventually you come to realize that it's one of the best items in the game because you can always rely on it. It's always there. It's always going to do what you want it to do. And similarly in Castlevania, once you have, in those early Castlevania games, once you have learned what your character can do and learned how to, you know, use that to kind of, you know, take on this world, it doesn't exactly become easy, but what it does become is intensely satisfying to try and master, and to play your way through. And I think Castlevania 1, 3, and 4, which are all basically remakes of the same game from various angles, are all just really, really great variations on that essential idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I mean, the general understanding, and it is, you know, it. I think I agree with it as well. That 3 really is a standout, and it is. The levels. I don't know quite what precisely it is about it, but it's something about the atmosphere that it conjures. Like, it's beautiful NES graphics. Like, there's the use of colors and just the atmospheric nature of the game, combined with levels that are just the right length. They never outstay their welcome. They're always, but they're not. They're also very challenging. They support all kinds of little secrets and things. There are other characters you can find and unlock. There's the variety of places you go to. There's sort of like a choice of routes through the game that you can take. So there are more places to explore after you finish the game. It's a really good game. Sort of going backwards through them. Contrasting that with the first game, which was a much more simple action game, which set all of the principles of the game. Like, it to all intents, it does feel the same as 3 does in the way that you move, the weapon sets you have, and that sort of thing. Let's talk about Castlevania 1 after 3, though. It's a much simpler game, much more straightforward. You are going through its levels one after the other. And amazingly, well, we mentioned earlier on during the Symphony bit of the pod, but you're fighting like 30s Hollywood film creatures. There's the Frankenstein's monster. There's the mummy. There's a massive bat. Is there a film with a bat in it from the 30s? I don't know.
This feels likely, yeah.
But it's really schlocky.
It's great. It's got great horror vibes. Like with that bat, you arrive in its arena and it's just up there on the ceiling, just kind of waiting for you, and then it comes at you. I love that. It's fantastic.
But despite that simplicity, like it sets everything that would come in the other NES games, everything that was in 3, certainly, like the move set, everything feels the same. The weapons, all of these things, it just got right from the very start, which is always sort of strangely surprising to come back to. But then I suppose if something's successful, you only play the winners, and if it was a winner from the start, then of course nobody's going to try and change it too much. So, maybe that isn't so surprising. But weirdly enough, it often does feel like they bottled lightning back then.
Yeah. Beautiful music as well, I would say.
Oh yeah.
Just really like stunning use of chip music, to kind of build this kind of orchestral gothic vibe. I just absolutely love it. And then the kind of the level music is wonderfully propulsive and
driving tunes.
Yeah, it really is driving tunes. Yeah, and we didn't talk much about the sort of sound design, but again in Castlevania 3, the sound is just lovely and crunchy and chunky and all the right kind of satisfying sort of noises that they're making. We didn't talk about Vampire Survivors, which is the game at the moment, but like that game, like straight up lifts a bunch of its sound effects from the Castlevania games to great effect. I think the sound of the cross, the kind of sort of thing it makes, which is just deeply cool.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Vampire Survivors, is like a delirious kind of love letter to a game which, all other ways other than the style that it takes, has no relationship with at all. But
it's almost like he threw a dart in his bedroom and it hit a Castlevania poster, and he thought, that'll do. I'll use that theming. It could have been Sonic. It could have been Hedgehogs.
Do it well and really take every aspect. I
mean, if you like pasty aristocrats in low slung V-necks with ruffs, I mean, that's every character in that game, isn't it? So.
And I also enjoy the journey that the first 3 games took, which is sort of, we'll do it simple the first time round, and then it's successful. I can just imagine the kind of the team behind it just going, wow, that was successful. But what people really want to do is a free roaming adventure where they get to just go to villages, like an RPG that you just get to visit this land, and they're Castlevania levels. And that's Castlevania 2. It's not called 2, is it? I can't remember what it's called.
It's called. It's got the most rock and roll name of all time: Simon's Quest. Which is never not going to be hilarious to me. Simon's Quest. It's ridiculous. No, there's a crazy thing that they would do in that era. They did the same thing with Zelda 2, I think, where they're like, let's make a game that is in many ways like 15 years ahead of its time, but also more or less unplayable.
Yeah. I haven't really gotten very far with it because it's just feels so sprawling. There's some really cool stuff with like the nighttime thing where there's a day-night cycle sort of that runs in real time. Well, not real time, but time persists as you play, and the enemies become twice as tough at night, but they drop twice as much stuff, like money that you'll need to invest in stuff, and which is cool idea, kind of, but then you sort of go, this is a slog. It feels.
I know there's people who really love it, and I'm sure there's some excellent kind of secrets to be had in it. But for me, it's too unforgiving when you start playing it. It's too.
But I think it continues that way.
And
in the very first village that you're in, which is a sort of weird village because it's a platformer. Still, just like the original, the original Castlevania. So you're kind of going along platforms in the sky and on the floor, and if you miss a platform, you will plunge to your death in the middle of a village, a friendly village. And there are these people wandering around, and if you talk to them, they will give you extremely oblique hints about very important secrets that you'll require, like a completely abstract things that you need to do in order to gain access to, mission critical things. And a lot of them, and they also lie. I think somebody says in the first village that such and such is a liar. And it turns out that quite a few of them tell you incorrect information. But there's a part of me that really loves that idea because this is the era of games based on hearsay, because you're hearing about them in your playground. We weren't, because none of us had NESs. But in America,
someone was. Americans were, yeah.
Americans were in the schoolyard. They were, sharing information and theories and testing stuff out and coming back to discuss it.
Nothing's going to scare me more than an 8-bit video game that has consumable items on sale in it. It's just the most anxiety-provoking thing. You're like, hello, I can sell you some biscuits. And you're like, do I eat them now? Do I eat them later? Do I have to eat them, before a boss? Are there going to be more biscuits, or is this all of the biscuits I'm ever going to get in this game? Like, what are the terms of this purchase? Am I spending £1,000 on it or 5p? It's just, they never let you know what economy you're in with those things. And it's always so frightening to encounter.
And it's only through like multiple playthroughs and lots of discussions with your friends that, it's hell. I started it and I will never play it again.
One thing I like about it is in Rondo of Blood, which we'll get to, the burning village that you go through at the beginning of that game is the village from Simon's Quest.
Yeah, fuck you, Simon's Quest.
Fuck you, Simon's Quest. We're going to set it on fire and fill it with skeletons.
I was just going to, so the series then just sort of did this sort of slalom course through remakes. So there was obviously Super Castlevania 4, which another title that makes no fucking sense because it's not it's not the fourth game in the series. It's not even the fourth game that came out. And it's a remake of the first, except for it changes almost everything. Around the same time, there was, and I'm going to say this wrong, this is the Japanese name for the series, Anjamanu, I don't even know. I misspelled it in my notes, so I don't even know how to say it. Anyway, Anjamanu Dracula. I'm sorry about my pronunciation. Came out for the X6800, which was this fucking amazing Japanese computer, which has just come out, and I've banged on about this on the podcast a lot of times now, and I'm going to do it again. On the Mister system, which is like a hardware emulation system, and a core has been around in it for a long time, but it was recently completely revamped and made very playable. This whole screed of Japanese computer games, which are really hard to play anywhere else, and one of them is this Castlevania game, which is again a remake of the first game, or whatever it is, a remake of one of the games. I don't even. It's the same remake as Castlevania 4 anyway, and it's so good. The whip sound in that game, it does this whoosh. It's so good. It's the most sharp. Like every time you do it, you just go yes. And when it hits something, it's just so positive about it. And this game, it gives you air control as well. And I was just going to say that it has this shittest thing that it does on you, horrible thing. In the castle area, close to the start of the game, you know that level design pattern that's in a lot of the Castlevania games, where you've gone through the entry corridor. And then you come into the area where usually when you go down, you'll go into the cistern, the sewers with all the fishmen, right?
Yep, some jumpy fishmen, yeah.
Yep. And usually the game wants you to go through the fishmen and then come back up again because there's a large bouldery thing when your jump isn't high enough to get past this thing that allows you to go from that chamber that goes down to straight across.
And there's probably going to be like a big pig that's going to chase you at that point.
In this game, you go down some steps and there is there's a thing on the wall for like a candle on the wall to get a heart. So you do that. But if you mistime your strike, you'll hit the wall and the wall will break and it will not reveal food, which is another one of the series' things. It will reveal infinitely spawning flea men who then just swarm you and kill you.
That's fantastic.
It is the most trollest thing in the world, and I kind of love it.
That's great.
Anyway, I think that talk to me about Castlevania 4.
Oh man, I love Castlevania 4 so much. I mean, to some people it is kind of, the lesser game because you're more powerful in it. You've got multi-directional whip now that you can basically hit, anything from any point in the game. You've got a super OP whip. And it is a much less precise game. I think it does a really good job of being like the noob's choice for a Castlevania game because it's still really like brutally hard, but it is also kind of you are more powerful in it. Your jumping and your whipping is more powerful, and you can build up your character with the sort of special items, and it's just great fun. The music is fantastic. The graphics still hold up really well. There's a level which kind of rotates, round you, which I gather at the time was an absolute mind blower to the people playing it, and still looks really great now. For me, when I turn on the Castlevania collection on my Switch, that is the one that I always end up playing, because it doesn't take quite so much concentration, and I'm not going to get quite as much out of it, I think, as I would from Castlevania 3. However, for like pure dumb fun, and enough kind of twitchiness in there to kind of keep it interesting, I think it's a really wonderful game. Again, fantastic music, fantastic pixel art, sound design. It's kind of a perfect game in many ways. It's just less rigorous than what's come previously, I think.
Yeah. No, I get far in it on a single kind of go, and so that I like it for that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's what I was just saying in so many words. I think you might have just translated me there.
Also, you can swing your whip around. You got this sort of limp little whip if you hold down the attack button, and then you can use the D-pad to kind of whirl it around in an extremely ineffective way. It's so good.
Yeah, it really is a game that is kind of deeply horny about the multiple powers of whips, isn't it? You're swinging around on it, you're twirling it around. The fact that it drops down loosely by your side once you swung it is just kind of ridiculous, but really good fun. Yeah.
So did you play much of Bloodlines, which was the Mega Drive take on Castlevania, and I just love how different it is. It's like Nintendo prim and proper, and is going to give you a really generous game, which is honest and true to its beginnings, but it's generous with it. But then the Mega Drive game.
I think maybe there was an office at Konami, and they got a picture which was of an American kid with blonde hair and a backwards baseball cap and a T-shirt with some sunglasses on it, a son wearing sunglasses, and he's sort of sneering at you, and he's gonna probably call you a word that begins with F if you're not cool. And they said, this is our target audience for this game. This is who we need to make this game for. And then everything was catered towards that one, speculative American kid who probably lived in Florida. And they made Bloodlines because it is like it is just a kind of deeply moronic, but kind of fun and glorious take on the Castlevania kind of thing. I think just like made with a mixture of contempt and sort of joy in what they were doing. It's a good game. It feels like it plays like Streets of Rage, but Castlevania.
Yeah, it's like
great.
Throws gouts of blood all over the screen. It's like your character is huge as well, and like very muscly. Like it was definitely that sort of era of the kind of pumped up, kind of glistening meat men. But I was just like two characters. You get to choose between two characters. One is a whippy guy, and the other has a fucking spear and controls like nothing else in the entire series. And bouncing up and like being able to reach incredible heights, just bouncing around. And I don't know. I that's an excess, which I don't know. There's little shadows of Symphony of the Night in there, I think.
Yeah, I need to go back and play that one again. Actually, it's in the collection, I think, because I've only ever played through the sort of first third of it or something like that. And I
don't think I've played maybe half of it so far. But it's like I do also like the fact that it's it takes you to all these different locations. So you go to Greece, of course, and like with a flooding level, so you've got to make your way up, fighting your way up as a level floods. It's a very it's very much interested in spectacle, which I think there's sporadic moments of spectacle in the previous series. It's usually quite controlled about it, like, and it wants you to believe you're in a castle, and it wants you to feel that areas fit together, and so there aren't many kind of contrived things like, a flooding level and those sorts of things. There are those kind of amazing Mode 70 things in Castlevania 4 on the SNES, but this one is the set piece game, which makes it, I think, as in my experience, feel quite sort of bitty and and without the wanting to put you in the world of Castlevania. It doesn't feel like a Castlevania game at all, but yeah, it's a properly good game.
I think I'm just conditioned as well that whenever I hear something coming out of the Sega Mega Drive sound chips, I'm just instantly, like there's that like thing you can do with
burbly,
yeah, all that sort of stuff. Effects. Like there's that thing you can do with like kittens, where like if you pick them up by the scruff of the neck, they sort of hang loose. I don't suggest anyone does this, but I think it's something to do with their mothers and how they pick them up and they just go limp. And I think that's what the Sega Genesis, sound card does for me. I'm just it just puts me into a kind of pliant state of kind of nostalgia. I'm very suggestible. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's good. Hey, so I think we should talk about the last game. This is a good. Should we? Well, no, we hadn't talked about the. I thought about talking about the Castlevania 2, which was on the Game Boy, but I haven't played that much of it. Did you play much of that one?
The Game Boy Castlevanias.
Yeah.
They're fine. I mean, as I said at the start, like they were my only kind of experience of Castlevania games for a long time, and they were just prohibitively hard. But I've since gone back to them and played a fair amount of both of them. I think the second one is considered to be the far superior. I mean, it's fine. It's okay. It's a Game Boy game. it's
Yeah.
It's weird playing a Game Boy game now. They feel like they've kind of fallen out from another dimension. They're just sort of so strange in how they look and feel. Yeah, that's kind of all my only feelings about those games. Really, the jumping feels good. The jumping and the hitting is all there. So
yeah.
Yep.
So the final game that we're going to talk about, which brings us at its conclusion to the start of the podcast with Symphony of the Night, the Rondo of Blood, which was really hard to get your hands on back in the day because it was on PC Engine, on a CD game on PC Engine, which put it out of the hands of almost everyone in Britain, I would say.
Yeah.
So I've only played it very recently. And so, as we said, the conclusion, the climax of that game is the start of Symphony of the Night. And, it's a really good looking game, and on hardware that I've actually grown to, through the Mister to really love. I think the PC Engine is just the games on that game, just on that machine, just something about them. And Rondo of Blood, I think, is one of the very pinnacles. It's a beautiful, beautiful game. Lovely, lovely art, real sense of color. But the thing about Rondo of Blood is this is where the series really, this is where Symphony of the Night decided to be crazy. And this Rondo of Blood wants to tell you a story, and it wants to be dramatic, and it wants to, it's got a real air to it. This game starts very similarly to the Alucard start in Symphony of the Night, but this time you are probably a Belmont. We've said, haven't we? You're Trevor Belmont, Simon. You're a Belmont. Trevor Belmont. It's Trevor Belmont.
I think it's Trevor, yeah.
You're on a carriage rushing through a forest at night in a storm. The trees are scrolling by you at 60 frames a second. It's beautiful. And then death appears, and you have a fight with death on your carriage as you're driving through the forest. You defeat death. You jump. And then you're at the start of the level. You're into the castle. I've mangled the end of the description, but it's a really beautifully, just such a brilliantly dramatic start to the game.
Well, also, got this prologue, which is in German.
Oh, I forgot about the German prologue, yeah.
The German prologue, which if you play the game like I did on emulator, you're like, oh, have I got a German version of the game? It's like, no. They wanted it to sound gothic and weird to the Japanese audiences, so they had it done they had the opening crawl done in German. I mean, but
it's anime as well, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's like anime. It's like cheap anime, like animation of all the kind of stuff going on there. And then again, this game establishes the story in the game, which is more or less non-existent. But again, it establishes this precedent of Dracula talking absolute bollocks all the time. I don't know where they got this idea from, but I love it that every encounter with Dracula must be kind of very quickly confronting the whole idea of existence itself, and that he would talk in these kind of mad philosophical tantrums.
Well, he's had a lot of time to think,
Yeah, so... I guess so, yeah. He's waiting for the one person to turn up.
To listen.
He goes, to listen
at last. Someone to listen.
I could give you some of my thoughts about Brexit. I've been... And there's a little girl in the game as well. The story's mad. I mean, one of the things that's interesting about playing it today is that it's weird because that system, which I'd never heard of until I heard of the game, you don't really know what it is and isn't capable of. No. So when you're playing it now, it looks, more or less, like Super Castlevania 4. I mean, it looks a fair bit better, but not that much better. You don't know what. It's got music that is clearly an incredibly high quality, and we'll come back to the soundtrack because that's one of the best video game soundtracks ever.
Yeah.
But the fact that it is voiced and it's violent, but it's also a kind of Castlevania game, there's a real sense. I find it quite a dangerous feeling game to play because it's so explosive in how it presents itself that you're not quite sure what it's doing or where it's going or kind of your place in it. And I mean, it's just a bloody brilliant game apart from anything else.
Multiple paths, loads of secrets, so that you can play as a little girl. She's the other character in the game. And if you didn't follow any walkthroughs or spend time kind of exploring everything in the game, you will never come across her. And that character is extraordinary, this flash of modernity, because Trevor Belmont generally controls just as the Belmonts of the earlier games, but although I think you could, this is a game where you can jump onto the stairs. You don't have to start from the top.
That's a huge deal at the time.
You can jump onto the stairs. Very important. But otherwise, the one flaw I feel with this game is it really does. The problem of the stairs is just, it really amplifies, lays it bare, where if you're standing anywhere near stairs and you want to use one of its magical attacks, which is the button combo up and attack, up also takes you up the stairs, and you're going to do that instead of making an attack, which has killed me so many times. Anyway, so with the main character, you're playing Castlevania Revolve, and then you find Maria, who has a completely different move set, totally different, and I don't think any other platformer felt anything like or did anything like what she was doing, but it's quite familiar now because she has a double jump, which is quite weird and oddly floaty and sends you in a trajectory that you don't quite expect, but is really expressive and allows for a great variety of different options, as you control her. And she also has an attack which throws out doves in front of her, who then loop back upon themselves. And so she's easily the easiest way to play the game because she's so powerful.
That's right. That's where the Vampire Survivor doves come from, isn't it? I've just realised.
Exactly.
That's where that's from.
They're all references. Yeah, no, it knows it's is where it hit the dart. Yeah. But she's incredibly powerful, and then she has these magical attacks which are also powerful, like a dragon and other creatures, which are referenced at the start of Symphony of the Night, because if that in the prologue section, if you are defeated, or if your health bar goes to 0 when you're fighting Dracula,
which it always does for me.
Maria will appear, and she then uses some magic spell which shows off all of the animal spells that you use in Rondo of Blood. She's real. A real surprise, this kind of flash of modernity and utter oddness. When you die, like as Jamie said, it feels quite dangerous in places like this game because of all the blood, because you don't know quite where it's taking you. And it will kill you very, like a lot of levels are very, very hard. But with Maria, when you get a game over screen, the game over is spelled out in great big toy-like, colourful, blocky writing. Which, why? Who knows? She's amazing.
That's so deeply creepy. The soundtrack, one of the greatest of all time in video games, I think, is just amazing. It is, I think, I'm a big fan of like everyone, the sort of Streets of Rage soundtracks, which, really tried to push the boat with how audacious the arrangements were. And I think Rondo of Blood is up there with those. It's just these really over the top, bombastic, kind of showy offy almost, they're kind of completely over the top songs, which loop very, very, the loops of them are quite short, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because they are so good. And one thing you can do on Spotify is listen to the sort of various permutations that the Konami sound team have done for, songs like Bloody Tears or stuff like that, where there's clearly a bunch of people trying to outdo themselves in how over the top and how much they can twist these songs into being more and more bombastic. And it's so much fun to listen to the games that have come since, or the various remakes and stuff like that, have kind of taken what is introduced in this game and kind of tried to run with it. And it's just insane music. And it's so much a part of the experience of playing the game. You can't imagine it without it. No,
it really is. It is really good, and like, as you said, the short looping, the short length of each piece because it's running off a CD-ROM, and the fact that it doesn't get tired is it demonstrates that completely. I really like the sense of place that it has as well. There's a ship level where you're sort of fighting across the deck and then down through the top deck and then down through the lower decks. When you're at the edge of the ship, it shows you the water that's outside of the hull of the ship. And you kind of, this is a series where you're going to peer into the water expecting something to come through or something to be visible because it's the sort of game that would do that. I don't think it does, but you know, the fact that it's there is, you know, again, like I mentioned earlier on, this, but you believe in the potential of doing that. It's so many different areas and they're so distinctive. And it's, I find it really hard. So I've also played them a lot, each of the levels a lot. So
it's funny, isn't it? It is a game in that era where it does kind of, it quite literally almost exists on a kind of weird frontier where it's on this kind of one-off console that never went anywhere, that had this, you know, relatively brief lifespan. And it does feel like that is what the series needed, is they needed a game like that, which was a kind of crazy stab in the dark, with kind of some things that they were, you know, new technology allowed them to do certain things, but also, you know, restrictions as well. And that's kind of what Igarashi needed to kind of fire him off into something like Symphony of the Night, you know, to kind of a game that is sort of an anachronism, really, you know, compared to all of its contemporaries. And, you know, the amount of madness that's in Rondo of Blood and the amount of kind of joy it takes in the kind of gore and kind of spectacle of things, you know, it does make it seem like, you know, there's almost a sort of an alternative universe almost where Doom was the only game like Doom that ever came out. And then, you know, it was this kind of complete flash in the pan and then everything went in a completely different direction. You know, it just feels, I know that's not what happened, but it almost feels like it's a kind of version of that where it's this kind of complete aberration onto what games were at that point.
Yeah. And I do wonder about, you know, what place did this have at Konami? Because PC Engine was an outlier of this machine. You know, Hudson, I believe, was actually giving companies money to make games for it because it wasn't really performing against, you know, internationally, certainly against what, you know, Sega and Nintendo were making. CD-ROM was this sort of exciting idea, but a real mess. And certainly at Hudson to kind of make it all happen. Hudson had these sort of engineers that they would just sort of fly into the game, you know, these external or not external, these rival game developers like Konami to help them produce this stuff. And I just wonder, you know, was this something they, you know, were Konami paid to make this game by Konami, by Hudson, and therefore it was just this sort of, nobody really cared about it, you know, because it was going out to die on this kind of console that didn't look like it didn't have much of a future, or you know, or maybe that freedom is what you were hinting at, that it gave Igarashi this sort of space without people on top of him, kind of telling him what to do. You know, he was able to explore. Hey, let's put a load of blood in. No one's going to care.
You get some similar games on the Dreamcast as well. You get kind of. You know, on a kind of Doom console, I guess there's that kind of weird feeling all of like, fuck it, let's just see where we go with this one, you know, and I think, you know, that's a nice attitude to have sometimes.
Yeah. And I think I believe that, however, that I mean, we're kind of talking about sort of that trajectory that went from Rondo's Blood to Symphony of the Night as being this, you know, this obvious like this obvious sort of step upwards, you know, this success, an automatic success. But I don't think that Symphony of the Night actually sold very well. I think.
No, it didn't. It subsequently became a classic, but it didn't sell particularly well, I don't think.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I don't know the sort of that moment in time when the Metroidvania became a thing. I mean, that was a label applied to it much later. The games within the genre were literally the game named by the genre name, and it took so long for them to kind of catch on beyond that. It's I guess what I'm saying is it's such an unusual form that he came up with after Rondo of Blood. And it is very distinct from the sort of Metroid version as well. It's a kind of, you know, RPG mixed with platformer, mixed with, you know, all that kind of stuff is a really unusual leap to have made. And it was so unusual that no one really knew how to grapple with it for quite a while. I mean, it took until, I think, Hollow Knight coming out, when someone had genuinely made a Igarashi style Castlevania game, which was properly fully featured and properly, conceived in every direction. There'd obviously been things like the Ori and the Blind Forest and those kind of games, and plenty of Castlevania likes that you would play on Xbox Live or something like that. But for me, it did take until Hollow Knight for a game to be like, let us like fully engage with the fundamentals of what a Igarashi style Castlevania game would be, and turn it into something different. And I think, lots of the other games that have come, subsequent to that or around the same time, have got a lot going for them, Blasphemous and things like that. But I do think, Hollow Knight aside, which is a really kind of 10 out of 10 game probably, it remains a real like white whale to make a good Metroidvania game, because what is specific to Castlevania is, and to Symphony of the Night, is so chaotic and difficult to grasp, that it's you're kind of setting yourself up to fail if you attempt it. And even the guy himself, Igarashi himself, struggles with that, and the industry at large struggles with that. Konami wouldn't make another Castlevania game, and I think even, it was in the era of Hideo Kojima working basically as the boss of Konami at that point, who was, struggled to sort of see how those games fit into his vision. So it's a weird genre to be talking about, because there are, almost in that same way of immersive sims, how immersive sims has like 12 games tops, but it's the best genre. And I feel the same way about Metroidvanias, really, that there's like a very limited pool of goodness, which makes it a very special thing. But also, it's kind of, it's frustrating that there aren't, that by rights there should be a whole bunch of Castlevania branded Symphony of the Night-likes, coming out all the time, and there aren't.
I don't know. I think I disagree with that, but for the first time, I think I disagree, because I think that its specialness is the fact that it isn't all over the place, and I think its specialness lies in the fact that it's really hard to grasp exactly what its formula is. As you were saying, how can you make it when it's even hard to recognize you're playing it, and it takes teasing it out in long conversations to kind of, oh yeah, that is the thing I love about this, and it's the craziness, and it's the fact that any one of its pieces is eminently something that can be criticized, but they come together as almost through accident into something that's different. And that's, you're
right.
It is on its own.
It's kind of like a big tentacle sort of flailing around, isn't it? The way the game articulates is so organic and weird, and kind of it's sort of a very internal feeling game. It's someone like feeling their way through what they want to make, rather than bothering to worry about what other people are going to think about it. And that is a very difficult thing to pull off, because you could just as easily make something that's an absolute mess.
Wow. Thanks, Jamie. That was a good... I enjoyed getting to talk to you about the Castlevania games. I feel that I've been playing them, very much on my own. So it's been good to, they are well known, and yet I don't think that they're much talked about other than just as symbols. And I'm glad I wasn't wrong as well about feeling that I like them. Well, thank you again. And I think that's it for this lock-in at the Crate and Crowbar about Castlevania series. You can hang out with us and our community and on our Discord channel. You can find the link at our website, which is at crateandcrowbar.com. If you want to talk to us by email, you can send your emails to questions@crateandcrowbar. You can also listen to the show on YouTube, where you'll find our various spin-off projects. That's at youtube.com/crateandcrowbar. Crate and Crowbar is kindly funded by our Patreon backers. If you'd like to know more about supporting our podcast and its spin-offs, visit patreon.com/crateandcrowbar. I've been Alex Wilshire.
I've been Jamie Britton.
Thanks for listening, everybody. body.
Place my